tossing grenades at windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I am Rhombus Tix. I am here to read Chapter 19 of the novel Micronation, Reckoning. Chester. Well, there she was. There was an awkward pause as we both stared at each other and smiled, which made even less sense given how we'd parted company the last time, but go figure. People are strange. Glad you're okay, I said. Yeah, me too. Thanks for helping getting me out of there, Chester. You're welcome. I would have gotten her out because she was trapped. I'd like to think the Fleur people did it for that reason, but it was a bonus that they were also fighting for a just cause. We returned to Fleur. At first, I'd been worried we'd have to dodge the entire United States military, but Michael Onyx explained that it would take time for them to gather any evidence incriminating us. That won't take as long as you think, I told Onyx in a plane on the way back. They might not even find out that it was us, Amberlove said. I shook my head. Don't count on it. You would not believe how thorough they can be when breaking down evidence. Amberlove laughed. Don't believe that they have magical powers either. Just because they show it on television doesn't mean anything. I laughed. Look, even if we get lucky, how long do you think it is going to be before someone at Fleur lets something slip? I mean, it's pretty much a given that they have spies here, and they can spy on everything anyone ever sends on the internet. Michael Onyx said, Actually, that might be the case now, but we're looking to change that. Huh? Never mind. You'll find out soon enough. I hate this cryptic nonsense, I said. Why can't you just tell us what's going on? Because we're in the middle of a war, and you don't just tell people what they don't need to know in a military situation. Amberlove broke in, concerned. Do you really think that we're in a war now? What else would you call something like this? I said. They'd probably call it a terrorist action. Yeah, well, same to them, Michael Onyx said with a grunt. We were given a hero's welcome when we got back to Fleur. I did not feel like a hero. I wasn't a hero. But I knew that the men with me were. So I just kind of marched with them, rather than as one of them, as we stumbled down the center line. There were people lined up on either side in the frigid air to see us, including my son and his nanny. They escorted us to the assembly hall. Of course, the hall couldn't fit everyone in Fleur, but gradually over time we had come to realize that there was going to be a need for something better than the cafeteria for this kind of thing. I say we because I meant it. I really considered myself a citizen of Fleur because after seeing what my own country had done to Amberlove and the fact that they put someone like President Hamburger in charge, it meant that I was ready for something better. I was an American, and I was a Fleurite, a guy from Fleur. There was only one tiny problem. I still couldn't let them use memes to survive. I had to find a way to stop anyone from ever using them again, even if that meant taking away the best weapon that Fleur had to defend itself. Honestly, I was pretty sure Fleur was doomed without them, but that wasn't going to stop me. Apparently, Fleur's fire marshal wasn't on duty because the room clearly had more people in it than it had been designed to hold. There was standing room only, though somehow they found room to part as we walked in and sat down on the opposite ends of the room. The area where we were seated seemed to have some kind of invisible force field keeping the crowd at bay. Knowing Fleur, maybe it actually did. Michael Onyx stood up in front of the crowd and said, I know how word about this op leaked out. I don't know how word about this op leaked out, but it obviously did. I guess they mean what they say about small towns and secrets. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Michael was surprisingly charismatic. I never knew he could work a crowd. He'd always just been there, lurking in the shadows. But now that the secret is out, let me set the record straight by saying that yes, we did conduct a military operation on U.S. soil. We had to keep them from counteracting the only thing keeping them and the rest of the world at bay. You probably all heard rumors about memes and our method of spreading them. Let me assure you, some of those are true. But soon, very soon, the U.S. is going to figure out what we did, and they're going to respond. I wondered why he was so confident. It worried me. Onyx raised his hand and gestured to the crowd. A lot of you have family back in the States. We understand if you want to leave now. Though be warned, you might be labeled a traitor just for having worked here. We're initiating an evacuation for anyone who wants to leave. A few people in the audience looked very relieved, but most simply reflected grim determination. How had it come to this? America was still the best place to live on Earth, at least I thought, certainly better than this hellhole, and yet a part of me felt that grim determination along with the rest of the room. Maybe that was because right now, right here, there was more America and Fleur than there was in America. Onyx raised his hand and said, I'll take a few questions now. A few dozen hands went up. He picked a somber male towards the back. The man asked, What are you going to do? Michael Onyx smiled. I can't go into specific details, but we're going to defend Fleur. The important thing you need to know is that we wouldn't be fighting if we didn't think we could win. Yes, you in the back. He said as he pointed towards a woman in her 40s. She asked, Are you calling out the militia? Yes, we are. More than that. Everyone will have an assigned role in defense of Fleur if they stay. We will need absolutely every last bit of help we can get on this. There were about 24 more questions, but they were all pretty much variations on the same thing. There were no questions that I felt really worth asking anyway. Did I mention that I'm a bit of a snob? By the time we were done, Onyx was reduced to, I don't know, I can't tell you that, or I just said, I can't tell you that. He looked exhausted when we were done, but still came up and slapped me on the back. I need you to come with me, Chester. Excuse me? It's time for your final security clearance. You're a good man in a fight, and we can use your opinion on some tough decisions that we have to make. There is something about combat that makes people come together. I did almost nothing useful when we went to rescue Amberlove, but suddenly we were comrades in arms, and that made me trustworthy. The sad thing was, I was going to have to betray that trust if I was going to save the world. As we walked through the corridors underneath Lure, I saw even more activity than usual. Children hugged their parents goodbye as we headed for the evacuation craft. Technicians with wires and poles moved swiftly around them. I even saw a few travel bots carry stuff from point A to point B. Part of me wanted to ask Michael questions while I had his attention, but my heart just wasn't in it. Michael Onyx wasn't the talkative type, so neither of us said anything. The war room looked very new, but very small. It had only 4 stations, which Michael informed me were linked to the op center upstairs. The door on the opposite side led to Fleur's secret labs, which were actually pretty large for a room on Fleur. 2 of the labs were dedicated entirely to the robotic travel bots. Fleur seemed to be constantly refining them, and there were half-built robots all over both rooms. There were rooms linked to the other op center where the bot operators linked in. Michael Onyx said, With a quantum link, we can control any machine that is linked here anywhere on the globe. Some of the lab codes say that it could be 1 billion light years from here and it would still be linked. It certainly opens up interesting possibilities for space travel. Finally, he showed me the meme room. I had been expecting a bunch of narcoleptic to be in some kind of vat, like in the Minority Report, or the one Amberlove had been in, but it was really only 7 terminals linked around a ring in a center. Only 5 of the terminals looked like they'd ever been used. This doesn't look like what they did to Amberlove, I said. Onyx nodded. That tank was to disorient and control her. It didn't really have anything to do with gathering, refining, or dispersing memes. That's all software. The magic all happens in that box here. He pointed to the server in the middle of the ring. I said, So this should work a lot better now that Amberlove is here? Yeah, I don't know how it works, but not all narcoleptics are created equal. It really only barely worked until Darla came along, and according to the file, Amberlove is Godzilla by comparison. Godzilla? I was hardly a ladies' man, but even I was smart enough to say something like a goddess or really strong by comparison. So you know all those questions you wouldn't answer up there? I asked. What about them? I smiled. Can you answer them down here? He thought a moment and then nodded. Sure, but the short version. I got to present the full report this afternoon, and I don't see any reason to invent the wheel twice. Reinvent the wheel. Michael really didn't have a way with words. I almost wondered if English wasn't his first language. Weird. Okay, most important question. What do you really think they're going to hit us with? Multiple attacks. They're going to try Black Ops first. That will fail. We're prepared for that. He smirked ever so slightly. And after that, they're going to hit us with a force that we can beat, though it will be enough to rile the people back home into wanting to smash us. That doesn't sound good, I said. Onyx checked his watch and then looked back at me. It isn't. The fact of the matter is, if the U.S. is really determined to destroy us, there's nothing we can do. Some of our drones have a lot of power. They pack a lot of punch. But that isn't going to do us much good if we don't live through the process. I licked my lips. What's your plan, then? We need to hole up until Amberlove can put out enough mimetic influence to get them to stop. He sounded very confident for such a plan, which was, so clearly, nuts. What am I supposed to do? The same thing you do for Quiescence Prow. Be there. We're not sure why, but both Prow and Amberlove have been far more effective at what they do, respectively, when you've been with them. I nodded. That didn't sound so bad. I didn't believe I had some kind of supernatural mojo for a minute, mind you, but I could humor them. It took about 5 minutes for Amberlove to arrive. Prow followed a short time after that, with Darla coming up at last. Amberlove looked around. Well, I guess the gang's all here. Darla hugged Amberlove, but it was a forced hug. Apparently something had happened to their friendship. Darla said, What do you want us to do, Onyx? All business. That was Darla. I want you to brainstorm a meme that will stop them from attacking us. What had happened to the briefing? Maybe it was the part I got or something? What concerned me was the fact that Prow was happy. Prow was ecstatic. At first I thought it was a usual insanity, but he wasn't saying anything. Then it hit me. He was working with Darla. So, I said. So, Darla said, looking at me and crossed her arms. We all stood there silently. Onyx said, Get to work. We're depending on all of you. I thought I caught him rolling his eyes at us as he left. I have a plan of action. Prow raised his finger. Apparently, he had just been waiting for Onyx to leave the room. No thanks, Darla said. I've got an even better idea. But I didn't even have a chance to let you speak? Yes, that's right, because I know what it is. Prow blurted out, because you told me what it was half an hour ago. I never... Yes, you did. Prow shuffled. I did not. That was a different idea. Darla laughed warmly. And then what is it, then? I thought I could do a profile on people like Chester that Chester interacted with in a cult, and then try to discern what their next course of action might be. Prow smiled wisely. Darla laughed louder. That's the same idea, Quiescence. No, it isn't. Is it? Amberlove started giggling. I couldn't even help but join in. It was so typical. But it was also a helpful break from the ice. Prow looked at Darla. And what was your idea? Darla tapped her foot a moment, then walked around the meme console she'd worked on before. She sat down and began to type. After a few seconds, she nodded to herself. I think we should only use the meme that I originally created to help convince people to support Fleur. Why change what we already know works? Only this time, Amberlove can make it stronger. You can help me think of places to put it. And what do? I asked. She looked at me, frowned, and said, Sit there and do nothing. Amberlove said, That's not what Michael wanted. I outright Michael, and I don't believe this nonsense about Chester making Prow even more effective for a minute. That made two of us. Amberlove smiled. Is it any crazier than narcoleptics slinging memes across the globe? I believe in Quiescence Prow. I believe in you. Chester is just... Chester. I winked at Darla. You are so repressing a deep-seated love for me. She slapped me. Let's just say that when Darla slaps, it's painful. She said, Does that clarify things for you, Chester? Only proves how much you love me. I was clever enough to catch her hand when she tried to slap me again. I was even clever about capturing the second. I was not expecting the headbutt. By the time I woke up, Amberlove was the only one in the room. We worked out some of the basics while you were out. Don't mind Darla. She's just under a lot of stress right now. Don't mind Darla? What was this, professional wrestling? Is there a medic on the way, I asked. No, it's just a concussion. I shook my head in distaste for Amberlove's comment. Just a concussion? Just a concussion? Are you serious? She smirked. Quit sulking. Are you insane? I looked at her in the eyes and added, What happened out there while I was out? Have you thought of anything? Amberlove said, Didn't I just tell you? Concussion. Prowl came up with a few crazy plans. But he changed his mind rather quickly when he learned the facts. Like what? I asked. I'd rather not say. She sounded very sad. Oh, come on. No, seriously, I'd rather not. She looked at me and winced. Finally, she smiled again and said, I think you should rest. Things will work themselves out. That isn't the most productive attitude. She snorted. Since when is my attitude supposed to be productive? Since we found out that we're probably going to die or be in prison unless we think of something fast. She smiled. We'll be fine. Rest, Chester. Sleep. She tucked me in my blanket, winked, and walked off. She had left me alone. It took me a few seconds to realize that I was alone on a cot in a meme room. The question was, what was I going to do? And how was I going to do it? I sat down at the console and began to bang out words. The computer groaned in protest, and soon half a dozen error messages came up telling me how what I was doing was horrible and please don't do it again, and if I stopped then, it might consider forgiving me. I ignored it until the computer locked up and I had to reboot. This time, I looked for some help files. There were none, but there were some comments by the developers in some of the source code. It was largely guesswork, but I kept going, not even knowing entirely what I was looking for. And then I hit the motherlode. It explained, in great detail, exactly what I would need to do. The memetic software was clunky, but for me, the only part that mattered was finding out where to put the message and how to distribute it. Amberlove had already provided the power through her insights. I just had to supply the meme. There were some passwords I couldn't get around, but some of those links were just worked by ignoring the password and clicking the OK button. My biggest break came when I was able to take the one of the demo memes, crank it open as a text file. Apparently, they were more worried about someone altering one of the existing memes than someone doing something using the system who wasn't supposed to be there. After reading the notes, I soon found out why. Some words and phrases were more effective than others. Fortunately for me, someone had created a spreadsheet which listed all of them in one easy-to-find location. I felt like Dr. Frankenstein putting one bit of a word together here with another bit there. It wasn't entirely perfect, but I was quite proud of it when I was done. It read, "There are things in this world called memes. They are not bad, but they do bad things. If you drive a car and fly all asleep at the wheel, does the car crash? It sure does. Why do you do that to your mind? Memes drive your mind when you aren't paying attention. Your attention is required. An outcome is desired. This is a meme, but a good meme. This is the meme to end bad memes. Just when you just fall asleep at the wheel, you have to wake up. Wake up, Sleepy Jean. Wakey, wakey, John boy. There's no free lunches anymore. You humans have to think for yourselves from now on. No more memes, except this one meme to rule them all. You are free, whether you like it or not." The blinking lights on the console indicated that it had successfully saved. All I had to do was press the button and it would spread through Hlur's network. I heard someone behind me, but before I could turn around, I felt the barrel of a gun on my neck. I heard Ferret's voice say, "Stay where you are, Arthurson. Don't do anything stupid. Now why don't you tell me what you're up to?" I'm not a soldier, but I had had enough combat to know that most people hesitated to take a life, even people like Ferret. I did something stupid. I pushed the button. Ferret swore and slammed me on the back of the head with the gun. The previous concussion made it worse and I collapsed to the floor. I did not black out, but I wasn't able to pay much attention to the world around me. I heard Ferret swear a lot and bang at the keyboard. I heard the computer process something and keep processing something despite Ferret's efforts to stop it. He swore some more, and I saw him aim at the computer. He almost pulled the trigger, but then stopped, took a deep breath, and methodically began to pull out each and every cable the thing was attached to. I started to get up. Ferret noticed this and slammed me down, but this time he had his foot on my neck. "What did you do, Chester?" In Chesterland, I said, "I told the world how much of a jerk you are." In reality, I said, "Nothing," which we both knew wasn't true. Ferret put more pressure on my neck. "Last try, Chester. What did you do?" I tried bluffing. "Don't tell me what to do. You just came in here and point a gun at me?" He moved to snap my neck. Naturally, I was not too inclined to let him do that. As he lifted his foot, I rolled out from underneath him, forcing his foot to stomp down on the floor. He then kicked me in the head again, and I felt something burst. Pain shot up and down my extremities, and I stopped trying to dodge his foot. I did not black out, but I did sink to the floor. I heard voices and then an alarm. Ferret cursed and stood up very quickly. I heard him run away. I tried to get up, but my arms kept collapsing underneath me. The pain in my head kept increasing. I climbed to look at the screen. The meme had gone out. That was about all I could do before I collapsed, and then blacked out again.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
Welcome to the penultimate secret commentary. I'm going to save the longer comments for the novel as a whole for chapter 20/epilogue after this. I will say this. When I wrote Forever West, I had an entire second half of the novel that involved a train chase and a messing around a secret rocket base and a whole subplot involving Nikola Tesla's brother, which at the time I thought were really fucking cool. But when I compared to the strength of the first book to the first half of the book to the second, and decided that I wanted to publish it, I basically literally took a saw, well, metaphorically took a saw, and chopped everything off after the cliffhanger. And it's a much better book as a result. I'd fortunately built a mechanism into the book to allow me to do that. And if I was ever going to sell this thing, I would take this chapter and put it right before the big battle with the aircraft carrier. Reading chapter 20, I assure you it's going to be an anticlimax compared to chapter 12, which was pretty cool and could have been longer, but, chapter 12 was the way this novel should have ended, and actually, in my mind, did end. This is not bad for what Chester's trying to do, right? I get wanting to, A, bring the group back together, and B, theoretically have a happy ending for Chester with a romantic subplot with Amberlove, which was definitely not going to be happening if I'd ended it in chapter 12. But the truth is that you don't need a happy ending. Chester, frankly, doesn't really deserve one, certainly not around chapter 12, and this plot should have ended then. It does give me a chance to explore a little bit more about Hlur, but not that much. I mean, let's face it. In my first book, Hlur turns into Asgard Station, which is a giant world-spanning conspiracy which eventually takes over the world. And it's interesting. In the second half of the novel, it's an oil rig with some cool robots and some cool mind powers. That's it. It's not exactly, riveting material. Of course, if you listen this far, clearly I was wrong. But nevertheless, this novel has so many problems that I took a long time in the podcast, 9 years, before I even bothered reading it. And I think, frankly, I'll just focus on this particular chapter. So, like I said, this chapter isn't bad. Right? Certain parts of it work. Chester is right that comrades in arms in a firefight will bond in ways that don't make sense. And Chester had so much access to their top secret stuff and so many of their people that at some point it just becomes exhausting to separate things. And for a small nation like Hlur, they just don't have the time or energy. Plus, they, thanks to Quiescence Prow, believe that Chester has some magical ability. I'll be honest, I think that was a question I never actually resolved, right? Does Chester possess some hidden psychic and or / genetic talent like Prow and his super intuition, or like Darla and Amberlove? And I think, honestly, based on purely reading it and what I remember, I'm going to definitively say that the answer is no. Chester is just a guy who happens to have been at the right place at the right time. There's nothing, literally nothing, in the books to indicate that Chester has anything except for the interest of Quiescence Prow. Now, Quiescence Prow does definitely possess to me, the best example is psychic, right? Psychic luck, psychic intuition, something unusual. He's insane, but he is right far more often than he is wrong. Chester is just a jackass who makes sarcastic comments and that Quiescence Prow believes helps him do stuff. And, never underestimate the power of belief. Quiescence Prow believes in Chester, and anything else, damn the consequences, damn the torpedoes, damn anything else that gets in his way. I mean, when you're literally willing to put a drone in a secret prison toilet to set up communications with your buddy there, then if you believe that your psychic powers are best unlocked by a sarcastic sidekick that you think is your Watson, then, that belief will convince everybody else around you. Either way, I did leverage some of my experience as a technical writer here, right? If you look enough in a Windows operational computer, especially back when this was made, not as much anymore, you could actually find all kinds of comments in code. And, once you're in the computer, the security isn't necessarily that good. Again, especially for someplace like CLR, right? There are places like the Department of Defense or government contractors that definitely lock down machines much better than CLR ever did. And as competent as they are, at the end of the day, they're basically just 5 cutting-edge companies that have come together to kind of pretend to do something. So they're in this sweet spot where they're far more competent than most libertarian/tech lords that want to, set up something like this, usually on a cruise ship rather than an oil rig, because a cruise ship is a lot more comfortable. And so far, I think that's been tried at least once, I think maybe 2 or 3 times. And it's failed miserably. And the main reason that in the real world things like CLR fail, aside from the fact that governments and nations are almost cartoonishly threatened by these micronations, but also because, libertarians don't work together very well. And I know that there's a lot of libertarians out there that are going to howl and, so on and so forth. But when it comes to libertarianism and the left side of I would say the left quarter of their own little axiom of left-right statist, there's left and right, and then there's statist and non-statist. And for the non-statist axiom of things, you got the anarchists, and I'll save that for a political podcast someday about my thoughts on anarchy. Suffice to say that I would love for anarchy to be a possibility, but I just don't even ever see it working, even in a post-human utopia, ever. Like I could see communism working. I could see theoretically a benevolent form of fascism. I could see a benevolent form of dictatorship. I could see a benevolent form of monarchy. I could see a benevolent form of just about every kind of governmental or economic system you can imagine. And I just cannot picture a real world scenario where anarchy works with a very large population. Maybe a small population that just chooses to do it, and they have a very successful culture and they manage to, keep it small, maybe. Any population over 10,000 people, humans can't. Maybe some other species could get away with it. Not humans, and certainly not genetic humans is our gene pool. If you manage to get a population of humans without any of the sociopath gene, and you manage to remove most of the asshole gene as well, or whatever, whatever 30% that sides with the British and sides with, anyway, I'm trying to keep this about my novel rather than about politics, so I'll just simply say this. To me, anarchy does not work. And while this is a political novel, I don't want to get too far into the politics of my commentary. I will say this. Libertarians are in it for themselves, right? And they might be in it for everyone and themselves, but at the end of the day, most of the time, that's about it being in it for themselves. And that means that groupthink and group synergy is not in the cards for them. So cooperating in a meaningful fashion for a radical experiment like this, which requires everybody to go all in, say what you will about the Founding Fathers, they were statists, right? They did believe that government was necessary, even if they wanted to limit that government and avoid tyranny. but they all made considerable sacrifices to make it work, both of their time and talent, and sometimes even their treasure in terms of buying government bonds during the revolution, or even during the government itself, or even during the 1789 Constitution, right? Public service was seen as public service. So if you think that the government is evil simply unto itself and you want to keep it bare bone minimum, and you're trying to create a government from scratch, how counterintuitive is it that you're going to have a libertarian state of individualists, work? Even in the case of Fleur, which is libertarian in name only, right? There's some little ways that it's clearly libertarian in the way it manifests itself and the habits of people in terms of keeping, minding their own business, which, by the way, turns out to be a security risk when you let somebody like Chester Arthurson wander their way in to disable their ultimate weapon. But, these 5 corporations are really more about letting each 5 people that kind of share an agenda, that just happen to need an oil rig in the middle of nowhere and eventually space to make it work. That's more about a shared agenda for 5 corporations, and corporations are not governments. Corporations exist to make money, and they might have a quasi-legal status to avoid liability. But the issue with cyberpunk is that in the real world, corporations can and do get their asses kicked all the time, except when it comes to the bureaucracy, right? In other words, if the state of any respectable size, and I'm not even talking about like superpowers or even regional powers, right? I'm not even talking about China. I'm talking about like wealthy European states like the UK or France, or hell, we'll just talk Spain, right? Spain is definitely in the middle there in terms of wealth and size for European power. And there is no corporation, and I want to repeat this, no corporation that operates in Spain that's going to act like the India East Tea Company and defy the government, right? They can bribe individual officials to delay the state decision-making apparatus as much as possible. They can corrupt, they can obfuscate, they can delay, but they cannot truly decide what a government is or isn't going to do. And the reason democracy is important is because governments are tremendously and terribly powerful things, especially when they're organized efficiently. And Fleur, by the way, is not really organized efficiently. It's a hodgepodge of a bunch of people doing tiny things for their own convenience and cooperating at one point because they realize that their goals are achievable, so they work together more, and they also band together tighter when larger external factors threaten them. But Fleur's whole strategy basically was very similar to China's strategy in terms of going from a regional power to try and match the United States, which is to last as long as they can off other people's radar until they can't anymore, which in the case of China was mainly Hong Kong. They couldn't have their cake and eat it too. They couldn't be nice about Hong Kong and also be threatening to their people and have to their own people and also have internal cohesion due to national ideology. And that's because China, just like every other human society, is not a monolith. And there were people in China that wanted to make the good times roll as long as they could. And there were people that want to invade Taiwan and Tibet today. And, there are people in China that would, if they could get away with it, take over the entire world. And there are people in China that want to just stay in China. And there's all kinds of spectrums in every society and in every culture. But my point is, in terms of the Fleur experiments, right, if it hadn't been for quiescence prowl, it wouldn't work. It just would not work. The meme, it takes the memes, it takes the special drones, and even then, it just would implode. The only reason that my first novel is possible is because of basically the almost divine psychic fiat of somebody that is able to be there at the right time in the right place and see something and that other people can't. And while that does happen historically from time to time, it's certainly not a reproducible or reliable formula.